Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. Now, if you follow me on social media or if you've been listening to the podcast lately, you know that I have been promoting Mind Body Transformation Live. It starts January 1st, so we are right around the corner from it beginning. I just want you to know sharing that is a lot out of my comfort zone. I don't usually like promoting myself, asking for money, sharing my programs, those kind of things. So why am I doing it? I've really spent a lot of time thinking about this. Why put myself out there and do something that's uncomfortable for me? And it comes down to you. Those moms out there who are listening, who struggle with their weight, who struggle with feeling good about themselves because of the way they feel about their bodies. I was there and I know what that feels like. I know that it can affect all the areas of your life. It can affect the way you interact with your kids, with your husband. It affects what you do when you're out with friends. It affects what you wear. It just affects everything. And I don't want you to feel that way. I spent years trying to find the solution and looking for the answers. And in all my research and study, I came across principles and things that really help and make getting the weight off and staying at a healthy weight for your body easy. So in Mind Body Transformation Live, we talk about creating habits. So this isn't a program where you work really hard for 21 days and you lose a bunch of weight, afterwards gain it back. No, this is a program that lasts for 90 days that's going to teach you how to live the rest of your life so that you never have to come back and do this again. It will give you the tools to change everything. That's why I put myself out there, even though it's a little bit uncomfortable for me. That's why I do this, is for you moms who can benefit from that. So if you haven't already, go to momswhoknowpodcast.com/mindbody to get signed up, get going with me so that we can work together for the next 3 months to help you to make these changes in your life. That is what I want for you. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast in 2018, you probably have your own favorites. But today, what we're going to do is I'm going to share some clips from the top most listened to podcast of 2018. Now, I wanted to share the top three, but that was a little difficult because number 1 and 2, there was a clear number 1 and clear number 2, but number 3 were all so close. And in fact, they're so close within, 50 or so downloads that it changes often. And I can't even keep up with what one is the number 3 of the moment. A few of those, I'll just share their titles and kind of what they meant to me on the third podcast. One of those is The Best Way for Moms to Get Out of Overwhelm with April Burzay. In that podcast, what I remember the most is that she talked about making and keeping commitments to yourself and how that helps you to trust yourself and to be the kind of person that you want to be. That podcast was particularly meaningful to me because after that podcast, I worked with April and she has helped me on business and life coaching and lots of things to help me develop as a person and in my business. And so that was a really great podcast for me. Another one that is up there in downloads is How to Be Easy on Yourself as a Mom with Sarah Beth Yoga. I love Sarah Beth, her down-to-earth style. Her yoga is so awesome, but I really loved getting to know her on this podcast and hearing a little bit more about her journey. After she had her first baby, she just wanted to jump back into things and really be right where she was before, and yet she had a baby and she had issues with postpartum depression and anxiety, and she had to work through all those, and she had to be a little bit easier on herself to be able to get through those things. Another top podcast this year is Choose How You Feel No Matter What Happens with Hannah Coles. Hannah was so sweet. We did that podcast at the last minute because that was the week that my mother-in-law had passed away. James and I had planned to do a podcast the night that his mom died. And of course, that was terrible timing for us to do a podcast. And so I reached out to a fellow podcasters in a group that I'm in, and Hannah agreed to be on the podcast. And that one has had a lot of listens. And I think the reason it resonates with people is because we all want to be happy. We all want to, do things in our lives that are going to make us feel good. And yet sometimes there's a disconnect and we don't realize how much power we have over how we feel. And so I think that's why that really resonated with people. Great episode with Hannah Coles. Another one, these are all so close that I have three more to share with you. How Big Scary Goals Will Change Your Life with Sarah King. Sarah King went from a stay-at-home mom to building a massive online business by deciding that she was going to do that and that she was going to bring her husband home from work. And her results have been phenomenal. But what's even more amazing to me in this episode is how she did it, because it's not necessarily about business. I know all of you don't want to go out and build a business and have this online following. It's not about that. It's about the fact that she took the leap of faith to do something she wanted to do. And I think that for me was the most powerful takeaway. She wanted to do something, she made a goal, and she went all in. And that was a great lesson for us in that podcast. Another top podcast was 3 Ways to Create Massive Time in Your Life. That was a podcast that I did solo, talking about ways that you can have more time. And the last one that I'm going to mention that's so close in numbers is How to Get Out of the Comparison Trap with Crystal Neeson. Crystal was so cute. She has this cute New Zealand accent, and it was fun to talk with her. But what I remember the most about that call is our different perspectives. So Crystal is a mom of 1 living in New Zealand, and so a little bit different situation than me. She's younger than me. She has 1 kid where I have 5. And it's interesting because we were talking about how as moms, it's so easy to compare yourself with others and to get stuck in that. And when you compare, you start to feel bad about yourself because you never measure up. When you compare, you always are the one losing in that situation. So that was a great conversation, and I just want to say I have loved connecting with these women and a few men that have been on the podcast. It's so awesome to learn from so many different people. So any of those episodes, if you haven't listened to those, go back and listen because they're all amazing, and you guys have shown that you like them by listening to them, sharing them, which I appreciate so much. Now, the number 2 podcast episode for 2018 is Why Sibling Rivalry is the Best Thing for Kids with Ralphie Jacobs. Ralphie is amazing. Oh my goodness. I love her wisdom so much, and she just has so much good stuff to share with about kids and raising kids and childhood development and all these things. In this episode, we talked about sibling rivalry, and I'm going to play a few clips here that really will give you a great feel for Ralphie.
So, how do your girls get along?
Oh, people ask me this all the time. They are sisters. They are sisters. They love each other. They are safest with each other. And that goes, that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? They feel unconditionally accepted, but they also are their true selves in our home. Like all the barriers are broken down. And so they practice a lot of things that we'll learn about here in just a little bit about through sibling rivalry that they learn while they rival. And so, yeah, they're truly true sisters. And here's another little side note is that I welcome that because I do recognize that children will behave like children. I don't expect them to know all of the social intricacies that an adult understands. And I'm actually grateful that they feel safe in my home to learn all of those things with each other.
That's awesome. And that is the kind of home environment we all want. I want to highlight one thing that you said. You said that they're safest with each other. How do you cultivate that in your home? How have you made that possible?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, stepping back a little bit, we all behave a certain way because of what happens to us when we do it. So, behavior is shaped by consequences. And as a child behaves a certain way and we give it a reward, then that behavior is stronger. So if we pay attention to our children while they're rivaling, while they're arguing with each other, we're making that behavior stronger. We're strengthening it. And we're actually adding to the list of things that they'll argue about in the future. And so what we want to send a message to our kids is what we will engage in, what we will intervene in, and what we will not intervene in. So we have to kind of create a boundary there. But once we've created that boundary, we can actually parent with more compassion because we're choosing when to engage fully out of love, ready to go, ready to connect. And we're not doing it feeling like we're being completely sucked dry and we're angry by the time we intervene. We keep our heads cool and we keep that adult-like behavior while making those decisions about when to step back and let them learn those things while they're performing what I like to call behavioral junk or behavioral noise. They're just making noise or they're producing junk, and then re-engaging when they're behaving well.
Oh my goodness. Okay, this is just right for me already. Like, I need to hear this. So, okay, how do we then as parents tell us how you do it? You see the kids and they're arguing, and then what? What do you do at that point?
Okay, sure. So sibling rivalry, it drives all parents up the wall. I mean, that's the truth. Like, it makes us all crazy, right? But to recognize that it's characteristic of every child, it's in every home. And in fact, studies say that it's in an average of 10 minutes every hour in every home. 10 minutes every hour.
Wow.
So that's really high. So giving that perspective, the goal is to just keep it within a tolerable range. So we just tend to give it so way too much attention. And again, going back to behavior shaped by consequences, people do what they do because of what happens to them when they do it. So it's very, very unlikely for a person to produce a behavior without any reward at the end. And giving attention to a child is the number one reinforcer for a behavior. Parental attention specifically is number one reinforcer. And so, in fact, many parenting experts will call sibling rivalry actually sibling conflict. And when a parent inserts themselves into that rival, it's called sibling rivalry. So it's just sibling conflict when it's between two siblings, but when we triangulate their argument, we add a third person into it, it's called sibling rivalry because all of a sudden they're rivaling for the parent's attention. And as adults, we all get that problems are best solved face to face, one-on-one, connecting with that person that we have the issue with. And so if my children are producing something to where I feel like there's no danger, I look at it and say, is there danger? Do I see danger? And if there's not danger, then I consciously decide to not intervene, because what happens is that if we do intervene, it will decrease maturation in the child, and it will actually decrease resilience. So if there's no danger, then not intervene and allow them to learn a lot of the amazing things that children learn through rivalry. And I can talk about the things that they learn through rivalry if you want me to.
Yes, I want to get to that, but I have some questions about
go
this.
ahead.
Because
yes.
What about, see, this is the difference between girls and boys here, because when my boys fight, there is danger. Like, someone is beating on someone physically. They're, sitting on someone and pounding on them. So sometimes I feel like, gosh, I better save that kid who's, being beaten with a rod or whatever.
Being pounded on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's that. Two things I would love for you to speak to. One is, the physical. And then the other one is sometimes I actually try to put this into practice and try to let them work things out by themselves. And a lot of times after the conflict is over, my boys will come to me and say, you never do anything. You don't you never do anything to him. You never bust him basically for doing whatever he did
Yeah.
to me. So they're looking at this situation and looking at me trying to let them work it out as me not caring. So I'd love for you to
Okay.
speak to both of those points.
Okay, so first of all, the hitting and pounding. So that's harder for a mother because mothers tend to have more of like their emotional intelligence is like connectivity. So it's more verbal, it's talking, it's expressing themselves through their words. And male emotional intelligence is more physical, it's kinesthetic. And the brain is growing and building scaffolding to their prefrontal cortex, which is like the reasoning, the creativity, like the problem solving part of their brain, that high level of thinking that we want our kids to learn how to do. They're building that scaffolding up to that through working out emotional intelligence. So if you can look at it that way, physicality is just is that piece, that kinesthetic piece that males more often show than females. And again, it's hard for a mother, particularly because that's not how we deal with issues, right? Like we just don't problem solve. We don't resolve conflict that way. So it's really hard for moms to understand brothers pummeling each other. I would, if you truly feel like it is consequential, you truly feel like there's true danger, lasting damage to what's going on, then of course intervene, because that would be the responsible thing to do. And there's a simple strategy there called stop, redirect, reinforce, which just means you stop the behavior, you call the child by name, you get the child to tell you what they're supposed to be doing. That's really important because it engages the brain of the child and teaches the child that the answer is within them. And then also redirect the child. So that's the redirect piece. And then reinforce means that you come back. This is a really important piece. Parents often forget this piece. You have to come back in like a minute and reinforce, saying, thank you for playing so kindly. You're such a good big brother, or whatever it is that you want to reinforce, that behavior that you want to make stronger. Another part with, you say that they point at each other and say, well, you never, help me out with this, or you never help me out with that, or he's really hitting me. I would have like a family meeting where everyone is a part of it, and come up with some ground rules there. Come up with some ground rules. You can even write on a piece of paper and have them put the ideas down about how to be a solution thinker, how to resolve conflict, and point them to that when they come to you and they whine or they mope or they tattle or whatever it may be, and say, you're not intervening. And you can say, yeah, remember we talked about being self-reliant. We talked about working this out, and we practiced those skills. Remember, we even role played them. And I know I have complete faith in you that you will be able to figure this out. And I can't wait to hear how you figured it out. So that's another thing, is to just get them on the same page and have those expectations set on the outset before there's any kind of junk behavior.
Isn't she awesome? Okay, that little clip of Ralphie, if you haven't heard the whole episode, you're going to want to go back and listen and learn more to help your kids get along better and to see how you're playing into that behavior as a parent and how you could do more or by doing less as far as stepping in with sibling conflict. The #1 episode for 2018 was with Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, called Marriage Relationships That Work. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife works with couples on their marriage, and she just really shared things that put marriage in a different light for me. As we were talking about the marriage relationship, so much that she shared had to do with you as an individual and how you're showing up in the marriage. So here's a couple clips from that episode.
Forging a good relationship takes a lot of effort, and it takes a great deal of willingness to see oneself accurately and to deal with who one is. And one of the limitations that we have as human beings is we tend to create meanings or narratives around who we are that makes us palatable to ourselves on some level. We tend to, or maybe a better way of saying it is we tend to create meanings around who we are that often inhibits us from moving forward in a different way. So what's often happening when couples come in is there is a meaning conflict. They are in conflict about who they are, who they see themselves to be, and who their spouse sees them to be. And so when that's happening, often people really do need a third view in the room. They need another perspective to be able to break out of the way that they're trying to address their challenges, but getting nowhere. So oftentimes people are trying to do something, but they can't see their way out of the struggle that they are stuck in. So that sort of leads to your question, which is, what is it that I wish, what do I wish people knew? I mean, I guess I wish that people understood that when they're in conflict, a lot of times people will come into my office and they'll say, we have a communication problem. We can't communicate. We talk past each other. We don't understand each other. And maybe we've married the wrong person. And do you think I'm with the wrong person? I get, that a lot. And I would say that what I wish people understood is that the conflict is a function of what they need to work out in their own development as an individual and as a couple. That is to say that people never have communication problems. That is to say, if they need to go to a speech and language therapist, then they've come to the wrong person. Okay. It's not that they can't communicate. Even not speaking for 3 days is a massive communication to your spouse.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very effective communication. I want to make you suffer. Right. That's what they're saying. And you don't even have to speak one word to really induce suffering in your spouse. So people are communicating. The problem in marriage is that you don't like the message you're getting when you're unhappy, that your spouse won't see things the way you want them to see it. They won't see you the way that you want them to see you. They won't validate your view of things. And so often when people are in conflict, they're vying for whose view of reality is going to prevail in the couple. And so they're in a control struggle. It's very unintuitive and difficult to be willing to look at, but extremely important if you're going to move forward, to look at what your spouse understands about you that you don't see about you.
Wow.
And also
that's powerful. Yeah. What they see about you that you don't see about you. That just brought it all home. Okay, go on.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Because, we have these blind spots to ourselves, and assuming your spouse is not trying to manipulate you, because I can speak to that in a minute, but they are trying to wake you up to something that's hurtful or problematic, most of us will just, fight to the death to get our spouse to, validate us and see us the way that we want to be seen, rather than really see our own immaturities or our own selfishness or our own, limitations. And it's much harder to try and shoot the messenger than to actually deal with your limitations. But if you won't deal with your limitations, they will undermine the marriage. Fundamentally, it's your limitations that undermine marriage. People that are very limited aren't able to have good marriages. People that don't know how to love aren't able to have good marriages because who they really are shows up in the marriage and makes it very hard for their spouse to be happy with them.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Definitely.
So it's whether or not you're going to let marriage teach you and help you grow up. And those of us who will yield to it and will learn and will develop ourselves are much happier than those of us that will, take the other person down first or get divorced and go try again and find out that you show up again to the next marriage. So, it's a fundamental human problem.
Yeah. Now, I don't think that that's something going into marriage, and back to your earlier point of, we get married and it's happily ever after. We have this idea. I don't think that I've ever heard someone say, let marriage teach you, that marriage is this teacher. We don't think I'm getting married to be taught. We don't think that. And that really is so much of marriage is learning. And if you have that idea that concept that you're going to learn from your spouse, and that this marriage, this family life is a training and a teaching process, then you're going to be so much better off in your marriage.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You won't resist the lessons as they come, so to speak. Most of us get married because we're trying to lock in someone to love us. Right.
Yeah.
And we kind of, our promise is, I will love you as long as you love me first and better. I mean, seldom do we really fully take in what we're doing, which is to promise to really love and care for this imperfect person who will sometimes disappoint us, be annoyingly different than us, and you're still really committing to care for them. That's a much harder thing to really acknowledge. And sometimes it takes us a while to really choose to do that.
Now, in the little bit of time we have left, I really just want to talk about and kind of pick your brain on things that women can do to improve their marriage relationship. So as some of our listeners are hearing this, maybe they're feeling like, my relationship could be better. And there are things, both in the marriage relationship in general or in the sexual relationship specifically, that they want to have better. So what are some ways that women can just work to make this relationship better and to make it happier and more peaceful at home?
Well, what I would say is, if I were to start with just one idea, I would think about, what is the thing that I really know bothers my spouse about me? What is something that I know really is hard for them? And maybe if there's more than one thing, I'd list what do I know is hard for them, and to, manage any kind of indulgent self-hatred you may have in writing that list, think about, what do I really think undermines my spouse's happiness? And then I would ask myself, what do I think is true in what they're saying? What do I know is true, but I sort of pretend not to know, or I try to not think about? And if you deal with that thing, you really say, I'm not going to do this to my spouse anymore. I really am going to deal with this. Not just because I know it makes them unhappy, but I understand and know in my own heart that it's not okay, or it's not good that I keep doing this thing. If you deal with that, it will positively impact your spouse, because they will see you as someone who is willing to do right by them, who cares enough about them that you're willing to be inconvenienced for their benefit.
Yes.
So that's step number one. And that can be a big step and a very important step, because what I've often found is that when people start cleaning up their own side of the street, they're cleaning up their act, their spouse becomes more willing to deal with what you've been trying to tell them all along, right? Because they see, like, she's not messing around. She's actually, she means it. And she's somebody who's doing right by me. And so it also, what happens in marriage is people will often use the limitations of their spouse to justify their own limitations. And so, when you're yelling at your spouse about what they've got wrong, but you are unwilling to deal with what they're trying to, yell back to you, then you just keep reinforcing the self-justification in each party. So when you reverse that, it pressures the other person. It no longer makes sense. It's no longer justified. I would always start there. I always think that you deal with your half first, because then your spouse is more teachable or more willing to hear it. The second thing I would maybe think about is, what do I think is the most important thing that I think in this marriage for my spouse to deal with? Meaning, we can get petty, we can critique little things, we can get annoyed by the way that our spouses are different, and have a running critique either in our heads or even coming out of our mouths. But to really think about, if there's really something that I think my spouse needs to deal with that would truly bless the marriage, make it better, what do I think it is? And I would do this privately, 100%, and really think about, what is the thing that I think undermines us? One way to get to that question is, when you think about the thing that you do that undermines your marriage, one question to ask yourself is, how do I justify doing that? What is something that my spouse does that I use to justify that I keep doing this thing? that may speak to the piece, like, what is the thing that I think my spouse needs to deal with? And then to really think about, how do I make it easy? Because this is sort of in line with the same idea. How do I make it easy for my spouse to do what he does? So for example, I was working with someone today, her spouse often takes a kind of superior position, and he withholds information from her, financial information, decision-making things. He'll just make choices without her and things like that. It enrages her. It makes her very upset. Okay. But what she tends to do is just sort of resent and withhold and sort of pull back and not really, deal with that fact. And so when she pulls back and resents and is withholding emotionally and sexually and so on, he uses that to justify, and then she kind of plays weak. I don't know how to say it differently than that.
Right.
She just kind of plays little girl a little bit, resentful little girl. And then he uses that to say, I wish you'd grow up, basically, but he then keeps justifying his taking. Where she's really started to change is by being willing to kind of step up and talk to him more like adult to adult, not aggressively, but to say, I need to know that information because this is a decision that impacts both of us. We have to make this decision together. And he says he wants a stronger wife, but he actually in these moments doesn't want a stronger wife. And so he will often get punitive and push back, but she's been doing a better and better job of really not getting aggressive, not retreating to her corner and being passive aggressive or resentful, and just staying in the conversation and saying, we aren't going to thrive as a couple unless we can do this as a partnership. And I have made it easy for you to make all the decisions by me retreating and hating you for it. But we can't keep doing that. So that's her dealing with her part of the deal, her stepping up more strongly. It really pushes him to do his half.
Yes. Oh, that is just so powerful, that example, because I can see how it just really shows how one person taking that initiative and making that change and standing strong and,
Yes.
staying with what is true. I thought that was a really key component of what you said. What bothers my spouse about me? What kind of things are they saying? But what in that is true? And then working on that, that's just so powerful because it's like I tell my kids all the time, the only one you can change is yourself. But as you start to do that, as you start to change yourself, then the circumstances start to change too. It's so powerful.
That's right. And what this woman was saying today was, that she was staying steady. She wasn't being aggressive. And he was getting, kind of ramped up. But she said that he sort of checked himself. He could see that he just sounded ridiculous because she wasn't going into her normal place, that then he could justify his indulgence against hers. When she stayed steady, then he started to temper himself and come into a more moderate position relative to her. And so that's how you change the dance between you, is you deal with your half.
Great stuff from Jennifer Finlayson Fife. I hope that this has been fun for you, this trip down memory lane as we listen to the podcast together. And I just want to invite you today. First, if you haven't already, check out Mind Body Transformation Live. And second, share the podcast. That helps me so much. And I want to give huge appreciation and thanks to those who already do that. When you share it with people as you're talking in conversation or you share it online, it helps so much for the podcast to grow. So thank you. I ask you to continue to do that. That would be a great gift to me. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next week on Moms Who Know.